There's a belief that law enforcement, not specific to the city of San Jose, but law enforcement may be making car stops based on race and gender and dress.
It could have been because I matched the description of someone that had been involved in a crime, or it could have been because I'm an African-American male who drives a Cadillac.
I think the San Jose Police Department profiles just like any other police department.
A certain number of the members of the community feel as though they are stopped because they might look a certain way or have a certain lifestyle.
We're 5% of the population. We found out that we're 15% of the stops. I don't know why those numbers would change. We haven't had any training or looked at the issue.
That is improper, and that is in many cases illegal.
So today, San Jose's new police chief announced that his department will follow San Diego's lead as the second department in the country to voluntarily track the race and gender of every person on foot or in a car stopped by an officer in this city.
It's humiliating and demeaning. Having your car searched, being frisked, being asked about who you are and what you're doing in a particular neighborhood. All of these things are painful reminders that you're really a second-class citizen.
A little bit about that experience.
Well, Senator Kevin Murray from Los Angeles introduced a bill called SB 78, the California Traffic Stop Statistics Act.
When patrolling our nation's roads, the only colors the police officers ought to be concerned about are red and green traffic lights, yellow lines in the road. It should not be a signal for police officers to stop someone who's innocently driving down a highway simply because of their color. DWB, driving while black, is a threatening condition.
It's more commonly known as the DWB bill, the driving while black or brown bill, and it would require law enforcement for the first time to collect data regarding the race and ethnicity of motorists who are stopped by police. This data is essential to determining whether and to what extent racial profiling is occurring in certain communities and law enforcement agencies. We have been very active in mobilizing support for this bill. I testified before the Public Safety Committee about the need for this bill and the thousands of calls we've received from people telling us their stories about being stopped on the basis of race.
The group says since it began a racial profiling hotline last year, it has received some 1,000 complaints from Californians who were stopped by police.
But what I think is most interesting about the progress of this bill through the legislature has been the bipartisan support. Rod Pacheco, who is a conservative Republican, he's the first Republican Latino to be elected to the California legislature in the past century, gave a very moving speech on the floor explaining his own experiences of being stopped and targeted on the basis of race and his fear that his kids were at risk of being stopped and searched and swept into the criminal justice system simply because of their race.
Campaign announcement today said they have been victims. Raymond Marshall, president of the California State Bar, says a police officer followed him into his driveway late one evening and asked if he lived in the house.
He then asked what I thought was the second question: could you tell me the address of where you've pulled into? I identified the address, the correct address, remarkably enough, and the officer then proceeds to simply thank me for cooperating, offer no reason for why we would trail.
The ACLU contends stops of that nature exacerbate the often hostile relationship between police and minorities.
This program of theirs called Pipeline was a training program only, and it was to train officers on how to be more aware for officer safety reasons of possible indicators of drug trafficking, so that if they pulled over some guy for speeding, they would get a clue that he might be a drug trafficker, might be armed, and therefore they would be on guard. And that was the official reason that was given to me first.
The chief says now his officers will go back to the police academy for lessons on probable cause and for sensitivity training.
And I said, well, if this is a training program, I'd like to see the training that's going on. And the Highway Patrol sort of said, yeah, sure, okay. And they sent me up to Susanville, California. It was the last August of '98. and I did a 2-day training course. It was the intermediate level training course for Operation Pipeline, and they taught us how to spot drug traffickers driving by, how to interrogate people, how to do searches, what makes a search legal, what makes a search illegal, how to sort of, keep it right on the line. And then the second part of the class was riding along and sort of practicing these skills that you had learned the day before and pulling people over.
I think there has been a lot of positive movement with respect to the racial profiling issue in the past year. And I think we have finally moved beyond the stage of denial that a problem exists. And so hopefully in the next 2 years will be characterized by a search for solutions. Some of the solutions are obvious. One solution is to collect data so that you can document the extent to which law enforcement officers in a particular agency are actually targeting people of color.
Washington, D.C. today, some lawmakers called on the Justice Department to track racial profiling.
On the basis of race. Data collection is essential. The next is to dismantle drug interdiction programs that rely on pretext stops.
But you can say that, well, at least they're stopping drugs. I mean, if you wanted to be a total apologist for this program, you could say, well, at least they're getting drugs off the highway. The amount of drugs they get off the highway is infinitesimal. I mean, considering the amount of drugs on the highway, I mean, I saw those officers, some of those officers would go 3 or 4 weeks and not find anything. And that was one of the things in the supervisor's reports that was so almost poignant about this, is they had to keep pumping up these guys' morale, saying, keep looking, keep plugging away, you're going to find something, just keep looking. And I tried to picture myself as one of those officers thinking, what an awful job that would be, trying to guess which guy's going to have drugs in his car. And that's all it is, it's a guessing game.
African-American officers say they tracked police stops for a short time about 8 years ago and that the results were disturbing. Lieutenant Randall Cooper is a veteran officer in the San Jose Police Department. He's also an African-American and knows what it's like to be stopped without cause by police. Knows that to some officers, just driving while black is a crime.
It could have been because I matched the description of someone that had been involved in a crime, or it could have been because I'm an African-American male who drives a Cadillac.
It's called racial profiling. In Cooper's case, once he identified himself as a police officer, the officer who stopped him, this was not in San Jose, let him go.
Those stops that are made as a matter of policy, where people are targeted for routine, very minor traffic violations, when the real motivation of the officer is to question that person and attempt to search their car for drugs.
Troopers that made a lot of stops, troopers that pulled a lot of people over were given, glowing commendations from their supervisors. So they were under a lot of pressure. It was essentially volume. And that's one of the things that I saw in that Associated Press article that really caught my eye, was this quote from the sergeant who was on this team saying that the secret to this program is volume. He said, you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. And I thought that was kind of a remarkable statement coming from a law enforcement officer. And I wondered who these frogs were. Who were the people they were kissing and throwing back, and what happened to them?
How close to home has the issue got for me? Well, it's funny. I spend a lot of time telling other people's stories, and I very rarely tell my own. But probably one of the most powerful experiences for me was when I was in law school and driving with my family into Marin County. And Marin County is a relatively affluent and predominantly white community in the Bay Area. And my father is African American and my mother is white, and my sister and I were in the back seat. And we were followed by a patrol car for several blocks, and my father kept looking nervously in the rearview mirror, knowing that the officer was looking for an excuse to pull him over, and he was concentrating and trying to drive perfectly. And sure enough, the lights went on and we were pulled over, and the officer came up to my father's window and asked him whether he knew the passengers in the car. And he said, well, yes, of course I know the passengers in the car. Well, you know, they're riding with me of their own free will. He then asked what his relationship was to the people in the car and asked whether my mother and my father were married and whether we were, in fact, their children, and spent several minutes interrogating us about our family status and familial relationships. And then finally let us go without a ticket or citation of any kind. And that is certainly not the only stop that I've experienced that has been race-related, but it's probably the one that I will always remember.
The Campbell Police Department was the first law enforcement agency in Northern California to put cameras in its patrol cars 4 years ago. San Jose's police chief says he is willing to try it out, but to equip all patrol cars with cameras would cost about $1 million.
Why would Governor Davis veto this bill? Because PORAC, an enormous police union in California, donated $200,000 to his campaign. That police union is one of the top 10 contributors to Governor Davis, and Governor Davis may very well fear that if he signs this bill, that he will lose the support of police unions, support he values so much.